Well, hello youth, Miss Kraska here. Here is a lesson on percent equation and percent proportion. So it's a two kind of combined lesson. It's on two lessons from the textbook. And the thing is, you get to pick which one works best for you. So I'm going to teach you two methods to find either a percent, a part, or a whole, depending on what you're missing. And you get to pick which method works best for you. So please don't get frustrated if you're going along and like the first one doesn't make sense to you. Again, follow yourself as a learner. Decide, do I want to watch and listen with no distractions, and then kind of go back and write down what I think is important, or manage yourself as best as you can. Be positive and persevere. Make sense of what you do know to help with what you don't know yet. Go team. So this is just a busy page, just kind of information, so I'm not going to do a lot of math on this page. First vocabulary is we are looking at percent proportion. Well, guess what? Those are two previous learned skills that we're now combining into one thing. So we know a percent is a number per 100. We know that we can write it, say it's 30%. We know we can write it like that, or we could write that as 30 per 100, or we could simplify those also. We should know that a proportion then is when we have an equation that shows the two ratios are equal to each other. So here's a little longer version of that for you. So you're pretty much saying that say I get a 7 out of 10 on a quiz, that I know that that correlates to being the same as 70% or 70 out of 100. So a lot of those connections of percents, ratios, equivalent fractions. You do know this, so do not get overwhelmed in thinking that you don't know. There are a lot of things that you already know that you can apply. So these are some examples you might want to write down. These is it kind of in symbols, in words, and remembering that is going to represent our part and of is going to represent our whole. So I always talk about how we can decode math in symbols and from words, and we can transfer back and forth. A good little study tip here, again, is just that is and of part. And then here are some examples. I would pause maybe and either write this down, have some sort of example. And maybe right now you don't want to pause because none of this makes sense to you until you see examples. That's fine. Rewind, come back, and write down what you think is important. I will do a couple, though, just using percent proportion. Again, focusing on what you know, and you're going to watch me kind of decode using what I know. So this is important, and notice it's an equal sign, so it doesn't matter if I have my percent out of 100 on the left, and then my part or my is, and my whole and my of on the right, because they're separated, equal sign is the same thing, right? 2 is the same as 3 minus 1. 3 minus 1 is still 2. The order on the equal sign doesn't matter. So, one thing we do need to remember is what are we looking for? Whenever we don't know what, we replace that with a variable, right? So this says, what percent of 24 is 18? So using my information, I'm going to set up a proportion. So I write 100 here. Again, doesn't matter if it's on the right. It says what percent. That means I don't know my percent, so that's going to be my variable. It could be n, it could be x, up to you. Of 24, meaning 24 is my whole number, is 18, meaning 18 is the part that I'm looking for. Okay, and if you remember from proportions, how you solve proportions is using cross products. There are other methods, of course, too, if you feel comfortable with those. So you do your cross products. So you do 24 times a number n. So really, if I'd say percent of a number, which you've already done that video, what percent of 24 is 18? In this case, the reason it's going to be 1800 again is because we're kind of using that percent, but not as a decimal yet. So to solve this proportion, right, to get our unknown value, I'm going to divide. I'm going to divide by 24 to get n alone. And when I do that, I should get 75, and since it is a percent I'm looking for, I should put a cent sign on. Read it back to yourself to see if it makes sense. So you're saying that $18 is 75% of 24, and that kind of seems reasonable when I do that. Estimating is a great thing to do beforehand also. So this one says, what number is? So that means that I'm looking for my is. I don't know that part. And again, doesn't matter if my 100's over here or on the other side. What number is? I don't know my part. 60%, so per 100 of 150. So right now in my head, I'm going to estimate. I know that 50% of 150 is half, so I know that would be 75. So I know that 60% is more. My answer should be greater than 75. Sometimes just making that estimate helps you when you're done to know that your answer is reasonable. So then when I do this, I'm going to do my cross products. I'm going to multiply across here and here, and I get 9,000. To solve my variable, I'm going to undo multiplication and divide. Nice thing is here, I can just, divide by my hundreds, move the decimal 2 places, and I know that n is 90. Should my answer be a percent here? No, because read it back to yourself. It wouldn't make sense that if I said 90% is 60% of 150. You shouldn't have a percent twice. So 90 is 60% of 150, and yes, it's more than what my estimate was. All right, last one here, just me showing you, and then you have an opportunity to try some. So I'm going to write it down again. 13 is, so I know my is. 26%, that's 26 per 100. Of what? Meaning I don't know my whole number. Okay, so this is about a quarter of a number. So I'm going to do my cross products. I get 1,300 is 26 times what number? And then I'm going to divide by 26 to solve for x. I used x this time instead of n, see? Doesn't really matter. And I get 50 equals x. So let me kind of read it back to myself, make sure it makes sense. So that means that 13 is about a quarter, or 26% of 50. There we go. And I know that 10 would be 1/5, which is 20%, and that's a little bit more, so that seems reasonable to me. Okay, so on this page, I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. I'm not going to do all of these in their entirety. I am going to want you to pause. I want you to try as many as you think you can, and I'm going to come back with the answers. And if you get any wrong, I want you to kind of try to figure out what would you do to get to the correct answer. Okay, so here are your answers. I want you to pause again, and I want you to check just like the setup and see if that looks good too. All right, so there you have it. There are the proportions as they are set up. So kind of check in with yourself and see, oh, I messed up here or there, and give yourself a pat on the back for the ones you did well, and keep on working on the ones you're struggling with. Okay, yay, halfway done, everybody. Maybe not in time, but in topic. And so this is my favorite one. This is what I like to use because you know me, I like to just write left to right, write down what I read. And this is the percent equation now. And so, again, going back to kind of what we know previously, this is kind of an information page. I'm not going to do many problems here, so just kind of maybe put your pencils down and just listen for now. Part out of a whole. So, again, I know if I get 7 out of 10 on a quiz, that's the same as me getting 70%, or, right, which is the same as 70 out of 100. So, it's a lot of just writing the equivalents. So, it's kind of taking that multiplied by the whole. So, what we can do is this is our percent equation. It's always going to be part equals percent out of the whole number. What we need to remember, though, is a study tip here. When we're using these, before we just put our percent as a whole number over 100, now we need to make sure that we change our percent to a decimal or a fraction. So we have to make sure we're being mindful of those skills as we go. So kind of just a quick concept summary here of how things look when I'm looking for the part of a number, the percent of the number, or the whole. Some examples that could help you there. All right, a couple we're going to try here together, and then there'll be a page for you to kind of sample also. Okay, again, my favorite thing is writing in code, right? So whenever I read the word what, I'm going to write down a variable. Whenever I read the word is, I know that means equals. Whenever I hear the word of, I'm going to write down multiplication, and it's that easy for me. And then a percent, I'm going to always write as a decimal or a fraction. So this says 600 is, so that transfers to 600 is what percent, so I'm like, I don't know the percent of, to means times 750. And then I remember how to solve equations, right? Use inverse operations to get there. So I divide to solve for n. And so when I do that, I reduce, right? 600 divided by 750 is 0.8 equals n. Well, it's always good to think, what was I asked? I was asked for a percent. So do I think this is 0.8%? Or changing my decimal to a percent, remember, I need to multiply by 100. So it's 80, right, 2 decimal places, percent. Read it back to yourself to see if it makes sense. So that means that 600 is 80%, or almost all of, right, 750. Again, you can use your 10% to see if that's reasonable. I know 10% would be 75, so it's really 75 times 8, which is 600. Again, just using what I know to solve what I don't know. And I know I have to go in fast in videos because if they get too long, you guys don't listen. So slow me down if you need to, and of course, ask questions. But believe in yourself mostly. Let's try this one. So 45 is, so I write 45 is, right, decoding, 90%. Remember, I need to write it as a fraction or a decimal. So I know that writing it as a decimal is just moving the decimal 2 places to the left or dividing by 100 of what number? So I'm going to have my equation set up. I know I need to divide to solve. So I'm going to divide by 9/10. So I do 45 divided by 9/10. And I get 50 equals n. In this case, it's not a percent. I wasn't looking for a percent. It wouldn't be 45 is 90% of 50%. So 45 is 90% of 50. You can plug it back into check, right? So you could plug in 50 and do the math. Say I even used a fraction, so this would mean 45 is 9/10, right? 90% of 50. And remember what we learned about finding 10%. Well, 10% of 50 is 5, and I want 9 of those. 9 5s is 45, so that proves that my answer is correct. So a lot of familiar things should be coming back to you. I know we've had things kind of, we lose them every now and again, but you've learned all of this, and now you're just piecing it together for some very good consumer math, okay? But don't forget, if your answer is a percent, to write it as such. All right, again, busy page. I'm going to pause. I want you to pause. I want you to come back, look at the answers, check them, pause again, and then come back and see the work and see if it makes sense. All right, here are your answers. Oh, I forgot one at the bottom. It was covered. Let me just do that one really quick. Find 30% of 70. So I'm doing find is a good one because that really means what is. So what is 30% of 70 is how that one gets set up. 10% of 77. So I know that's going to be 21 times 3. All right, so there is the work for you of how you set up the equation, and then you know that you would use inverse operations to solve, or just divide or multiply, depending, and get your work from there. Again, I always recommend estimating is the best way to make sure that you know what you are doing. And then check your answer for reason on this. All right, one little word problem, of course, because we have to learn to break down problems, and reading and understanding what we read is important. A survey found that 25% of people ages 18 to 24 gave up their home phone and only use a cell phone. Yo, I'm one of those people. If 3,264 people use only a cell phone, how many people were surveyed? So you have to read between the lines, right? And it's okay to read it more than once. 25% of people, okay? And this was our total that we got. So a quarter of the people surveyed did that. So that means that it is 25% of the surveyed people gave us our total of the 3,000 and so people. So let's write that in words, or in symbols rather. 25% of the people surveyed is 3,264. Or if you want to do a fraction, right, this is the same as 1/4 of those people So yeah, that's a lot of people. So a lot of people were surveyed. How I'd undo this, right? In this case, I would divide by my decimal. In this case, I would multiply by the reciprocal. And what would I get, friends? Try it on your own. I'm going to get that 13,056 people were surveyed. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are super awesome. This part really doesn't apply anymore, does it? Well, it could, and you can find things online for sure. But rewatch the video if you need to. Watch someone else's. Go back to the book. But really just go back through and focus on what you do know rather than what you don't know, because you are awesome.